Hi there everyone, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawwalker, your host, and today we're going to be checking out this new album from Weyes Blood, and In the Darkness, Hearts Aglow. This is the fifth studio album from Natalie Lara Mering. Her last effort, Titanic Rising, dropped in 2019 to a lot of critical acclaim in the indie music circles. And that's about when I picked up on Weyes Blood as well. I generally have not been the most adventurous when it comes to a lot of indie. It kind of has to be shoehorned into my listening rotation by brute force, so when Titanic Rising dropped, I saw it brought up so many times that I figured I might as well just check it out. And that record is great. Natalie has an incredible dreamy grasp of every melancholic string being played like some sort of orchestra with severe depression issues. And while I love that project, a lot of what's presented on In the Darkness, Hearts Aglow is much the same in comparison to that last album. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, it is just delivering more of a thing that I do like, but I think some of these ideas are stretched really thin at this point to the extent that some of these melodies, while not identical, are sounding very, very similar, so much so that it seems like a second pass of the same ideas, just done a little bit worse, because it's not anything that's all that fresh. And while I can appreciate the lush instrumentation and the full production that almost brings a spiritual level of reverb to the music, it just seems like they've done a really, really good job of dressing up tracks that without the touch of production genius would be relatively unremarkable. Coming back around to the spiritual side of things again, it does seem very intentional with Natalie being directly influenced by religious music, specifically songs to be used in chapels during services. High ceilings and connections to some higher power via song does seem to reflect a very bare representation of the soul. It does just kind of end up being a bit of a shame that these lofty ideas and influences seem to largely be spent on songs that, with a few exceptions, just kind of feel like rehashes of the last record. So nitpicking aside, I do like this album. It has its issues, but those aside, how is this album just at face value? It's good. Like I said, it isn't breaking any new ground, but at the very least it is confident enough in what it's doing to be enjoyable. The opener, It's Not Just Me, It's Everybody, is a genuinely beautiful track with some intensely sad lyrics where it sounds like Natalie is just on the verge of dissolving. Can't hold on to much of anything with this hole in my hand. I can't pretend that we always keep what we find. Oh yes, everybody splits apart sometimes. It does feel like thematically this song comes back around to what so many artists have been touching on this past year with the whole doom scrolling thing. In this case, a lot of this song I think tracks as a critique on isolation as a result of technology. I think there is a bit of a duality of the lyric hole in my hand, which you could look at as a smartphone where you could kind of just pour over social media and never feel known. You could also look at it like a comparison to a stigmata, which I think could play back into the religious or spiritual feeling of the writing. Children of the Empire I think reads as a critique of modern capitalism, where the young are paying for their lives with their blood. There's designed fake desires, but even with those being satiated, no one is really living. This comes down to the children who haven't become apathetic to this, seizing destiny and changing course, so it does read more as a hopeful song than anything else. And while writing this, I kind of realized that this whole album is kind of like if Pure Comedy by Father John Misty wasn't very tongue-in-cheek and instead was just very unironically serious, which might be a little bit of an oversimplification. Grapevine I do think is one of the more simple tracks here, though no less pleasant, of course. It's kind of a twangy love song with lots of nostalgic references and calls to James Dean and his untimely death in a car crash. God Turned Me Into a Flower is one of my favorite tracks here, with a firm nod to the myth of Narcissus who gazes into a pool of water and becomes frozen by his reflection, unable to look away from himself. So it's a really transformative song about ego. I think it might also have some modern contextualization where you could view it through the lens of like eating disorders or body dysmorphia or transgender struggles. It is a really interesting, multifaceted track, which I think has been intentionally left up to interpretation so people can kind of assign their own meaning to it from person to person. Also, the second half of this track that is entirely instrumental is probably some of the best work on the whole album. Hearts Aglow is another love song. As one of the title tracks, I do find it fairly underwhelming, especially as a follow-up to God Turned Me Into a Flower. And with And In the Darkness as an interlude after this, I do think these songs end up being some of the more forgettable songs just as a result of them sounding like cuts from Titanic Rising, just done worse. Twin Flame does end up recovering though with this intro that sounds like it's lifted right out of a Depeche Mode song. As far as change-ups go for this album, this isn't the most dramatic shift they could have gone with, but this song is still pretty excellent regardless. I'm a big fan of this beat. It really sounds like a synth-pop throwback, which I do really appreciate. In Holy Flux is a short instrumental that I do like, but it feels like something that was maybe left on the cutting room floor during recording. As for placement here, it could really go between any of the tracks on this album, and it wouldn't necessarily add or take anything away from the experience as a whole. I just think it's kind of a redundant song. The Worst Is Done is alright. It's giving me some really familiar vibes to Moonlight Shadow by Mike Oldfield. Yeah, other than that, I don't really have much to say on this one. It's another 6-minute long track that may or may not be a critique of modern post-pandemic life. It's fine. The final track, A Given Thing, ends up almost being a highlight. I do like the melody here. I like a lot of the lyrics, and the build and sound and tension is very well done, but I think it kind of just falls a little bit flat as a closer track. Overall, I do think everything here is at least pretty good, sometimes incredibly exceptional, but the way this album is written and formatted, there's just a lot of points that don't necessarily feel super justified beyond the courtesy of their inclusion, especially with the majority of these songs being like over 5 minutes long. As it sits, it's a good album that could have been a great album if maybe it was just cut down a little bit and maybe had a bit more variety as compared to the last album. And In the Darkness, Hearts Aglow is a solid 7. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe, and if you like what I'm doing here, drop a tip in the PayPal. Check out my Instagram, my Reverb, and my Depop. Links to all of those are in the description below. Thank you all so much again for watching, and we'll see you on the flip side.